All right. So today we got to start with a really important theme that gets introduced in this period and then continues on and on and on to be a bigger and bigger part of this class, especially in our next time period. That is nationalism. So we need to know what this definition of nationalism is. So nationalism is a sense of commonality among people based on a shared ethnicity, language, religion, social customs, and territory. When we talk about a nation is always a reference to a group of people. It is not a country. It's not a state. People wrongfully interchange the word nation and state, and that's a mistake. There is no American quote unquote nation. We're an ethnically diverse place which practices lots of different cultures. That doesn't mean that's a weakness. I would argue that's a strength. But a nation is a group of people with a shared language, religion, social customs, and territory. So, for example, the Japanese people, that's a nation. They all share an ethnicity, they share a language, they share a culture, they share a religion. The French nation, that's an example of a nationality. Oftentimes, governments of nations will foster nationalism to promote a sense of unity. For example, the Olympic Games is all about national pride in your nation, glory and power in your nation. Governments will oftentimes do things to invoke nationalism and promote nationalism in order to foster a sense of unity. Sometimes that's going to have really good repercussions. And as we will see in period 4, lots of times governments promoting nationalism leads to all sorts of particular issues. Now, leaders of nations all tend to want the same thing. What is it that leaders of nations want? They want a nation state. What is a nation state? A nation state is when a nation has its own country. So, for example, Japan is a nation state. 99% of the people who live in Japan are from the same nation. That's a nation state. Italy is a nation state. Where do most of the world's Italians live? They live in Italy. And most of the people who are in Italy share a language, a culture, a belief system, and things of that nature. What is going on here? Britain is not a nation state. You know anything about the United Kingdom? The United Kingdom is a country made up of 4 different nations: the English, the Scots, the Welsh, and the Northern Irish. Generally, when you have multiple nations that live in one country, you've got one group of people who will dominate that nation. In the case of the United Kingdom, that's England. So what does a Scottish nationalist want? A Scottish nationalist is going to want Scotland to break away from the United Kingdom and to have their own country. So this is the dream of nationalists, both in period 4 and period 5. If you are a person who wants your people to have your own country, you're a nationalist. There's one entity that hates nationalism. That's empires. Think about this. What is an empire? An empire is a state that has conquered other groups of people. All empires are multinational and have many different nationalities they rule over. Nationalism is a humongous threat to empires. Empires hate, capital H, nationalism, because nationalists want to break away from their empire. Some famous, and nationalists can be quote unquote good people is viewed through history. People like Gandhi. Gandhi is an Indian nationalist in period 4 who wants to break away from the British government. Or nationalists can be bad figures like Adolf Hitler, who is definitely a nationalist who promoted the glory of the German people in such a way that he tried to justify what he's going to do to other ethnic groups and other people like the Jews. So nationalism can be forces for good, it can be forces for evil. But remember this: empires hate nationalism. An example of an empire that's going to really struggle with nationalism is the Ottoman Empire. Later on in this unit, we're going to do a day on the Ottomans. Just know that by this time, the Ottomans are barely hanging on to an empire. And in the 19th century, the white Christian part of their empire, which is this peninsula right here called the Balkan Peninsula, one by one, starting with Greece in the 1830s, you will see nationalist revolutions where Balkan nations successfully, bit by bit, break away from the Ottoman Empire and create nation states. Now, these Balkan nation states are important for lots of reasons. Number one, they're going to inspire nationalism amongst other Christian groups in the Ottoman Empire, and that's going to lead to something incredibly tragic that we're going to talk about way down the road. Also, it's going to make it vulnerable to other empires that might want to take it over. But just remember for right now that these Balkan nation states are an early example of successful nationalist revolutions against the Ottoman Empire, where nationalist leaders led their people to independence from the Ottoman. Many of these figures are inspired by ideas of the Enlightenment. Many nationalists who are part of empires also want to have an American-style government, democracy, separation of powers, all of the things that we treasure. So 19th century nationalists tend to also be Enlightenment figures because they tend to also want to have those political ideals implemented into these states that they have recently led to independence. So these are all examples. Make sure you know one specific example. I would just say Greece. Greece was the first place to have a successful nationalist rebellion against the Ottomans. But remember, it's part of a larger movement where the white Christian portion of the Ottoman Empire breaks away through force of arms. Now, this is one way a nation state is created, where your nation is part of a big empire and nationalists lead your people to independence. A second way nation states are created are in the example of the German people. And this is going to become really important because there's never been a country called Germany in world history up to this point. For the better part of forever, who we identify as the German people have been divided amongst many different smaller states. In the 1800s, the German people were divided into somewhere between 40 and 60 different states. And look how small some of these German states are. So the German people were divided into many smaller states. In this instance, the goal of a German nationalist would be to create one big, united, strong, powerful nation state, to unite all of these people into one state. And you are going to see German nationalists in the 1840s and 1850s. But while the German people shared a common ethnicity, culture, and language, there was one thing that divided the German people, and that was religion. Half of these states, roughly, were Protestant. Remember, the Protestant Reformation was started by Martin Luther, who was a German monk. The most powerful German state that was Protestant was Prussia. Russia, not Russia. Okay, people get these two confused. Prussia. Prussia had a very strong, powerful military. There, this territory in dark blue. They had a weird geography. You can see how the two parts of Prussia had been separated, but even though they were part of one country. And there were definitely people in Prussia who dreamed of creating a united German nation state under Prussian leadership. And then you have Austria. Now, the Austrians, in addition to this territory they control here, had also built a land-based empire in Europe, a multinational empire. But the ruling class of people in the Austrian Empire were Germans. And the Germans in the Austrian Empire tended to be Catholic. So Catholic Germans tended to look to the Austrians for leadership. Protestant Germans in these smaller German states tended to look to the Prussians for leadership. And you had German nationalists on both sides. Well, probably the most important figure in German history, not named Adolf Hitler, is a Prussian prime minister named Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck is the father of the German nation state. His boss was the Kaiser of Prussia, Emperor of the Prussians. But his boss gave Bismarck a lot of leeway to actually run the government and to run policy. Bismarck wanted to unite the German people under one rule. In the 1860s, when he comes to power, he starts to secretly build up the Prussian military. And Bismarck is the definition of a dirty scumbag politician. Bismarck believes in something called realpolitik, which means anything I do that benefits my state is morally justified. So if that means I sign a treaty with you and then break it with you when it's most convenient for me, that's fine. If that means signing treaties with just the intention of breaking them, if that means attacking you in times of peace, he's not above any of that. Well, his dream is to unite the German people under Prussian rule. What's the biggest obstacle to that? Austria. So in the 1860s, he secretly builds the army up while publicly sending many diplomats to Austria and professing to want to have a closer relationship with them. It's a really long story that you don't really need all the details of. But if you're interested, there's a great Wikipedia article about German nationalism. There's some good YouTube videos about this. And I'd love to spend forever about this guy because he's an interesting and important figure. But here's the very short version of the story of what Bismarck does. Bismarck, for years, tries to publicly say we want to have a better relationship with the Austrians. The Austrians are cool. We're becoming closer with the Prussians. We're overcoming our obstacles. And then basically, he attacks Austria out of nowhere. He baits Austria into a war that they weren't ready for. And the Prussians annihilate the Austrians in a war in 1867. This war is called the 7 Weeks War. That tells you everything you need to know about this war. If a war lasts 7 weeks, there's one thing you know about it. And that one thing is someone got handed their butts. And in this case, it was the Austrians. After Prussia defeated the Austrians, an interesting thing happened. I'm going to go back to this other map. Lots of these little northern territories that were Protestant, joined with Prussia. So his dream of creating a German nation state is half filled. But the problem is these southern Catholic states did not want anything to do with being ruled by German Protestants like the Prussians. So he had to create another crisis to try to get these southern German states to ally themselves with him. And what he does is he provokes a war with Catholic France. Now, France by this point, this is the 1860s, it's actually 1870 at this point, had been through numerous cycles of revolution. Since we left off the French, they have had an absolute monarch, a constitutional monarch, a brief democracy, and now France is ruled by a military dictator named Napoleon III, who was distantly related to Napoleon Bonaparte. I think he was his grandnephew. I reserve the right to be wrong on that, just off the top of my head. He was distantly related to Napoleon. Well, long story short, before Bismarck had attacked the Austrians, he had sent an ambassador to France saying, hey, I'm about to attack Austria. If I attack Austria, what has to happen for France to stay out of the way, because Austria was a French ally? And Napoleon's like, well, give me some territory. Bismarck said, okay. All of this was behind the scenes. Well, after the war with Austria, Napoleon sent an ambassador to Bismarck saying, hey, where's my territory? And the territory that Bismarck had promised him were these southern, weak Catholic states. Bismarck basically said to the French ambassador, I have no idea what you're talking about. Did we write that down? I don't remember us ever writing that down. But then he leaks a story to the media that France is demanding these small German Catholic states, and he promotes paranoia. He then leaks a story to both sides of the media in both countries, claiming that Napoleon had sent an ambassador to Wilhelm, Bismarck's boss himself, and they had a meeting. Well, the actual meeting was very cordial, although nothing was agreed to. But Bismarck leaked a story to the French media saying that the two got into a huge physical altercation and had to be separated. And the combination of this story of a French diplomat allegedly being dishonored, even though that didn't happen, and Napoleon being lied to about getting these territories that he was promised, France declares war on Prussia, which is everything Bismarck ever dreamed of. When France declares war on Prussia, all of these little German kingdoms go running into Bismarck's arms for protection. And in 1870, 1871. No, it was 1870. In 1870, the Prussians and the French fight a war called the Franco-Prussian War. It's a French bloodbath. The French were not ready to fight this war, and Bismarck was locked, loaded, and ready to go. Long story short, this is the first in a series of events where Germans will wreck France in a war. It happens for the first time in 1870. It will also happen in 1914. In 1940, we're going to start a pattern here. This war lasts about 6 months and ends with the Prussian army in Paris. After the successful conclusion of this war, all these little German kingdoms unite with Prussia, and Bismarck has achieved his dream of creating a united German nation state. And in 1871, he declares the new nation state of Germany. Now, just for kicks and giggles, though, he couldn't just name and create a new nation of Germany and appoint his boss, Wilhelm, the head of this new nation state. No. He had to be extra. Where does he crown his boss, emperor of the new German nation state? In the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. This is one of the great embarrassments in French history, where this enemy crowns their emperor in the most famous room in the French country, the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. this, you will not be surprised to figure out, is going to leave a mark. And from this point forward, the French are going to dream about getting their revenge on the Germans. And this is going to lead to a whole set of issues in period 4. So, what's important about Germany? Well, number one, it's the second way that a nation state is created. Fragmented people united under one group. The second the nation state of Germany is created, they become one of the 3 most powerful economies on earth. There had been industrialization amongst all these smaller German states, and now it was all under one big German umbrella. It was wealthy, it was strong, it was powerful, it was militarily a machine that probably possessed the most powerful army on earth. Germany ain't playing. And they become a world power almost overnight as a result of the uniting of the German people under Bismarck. So anyway, this is one example of a nationalist, and he didn't do it by breaking away from the empire. He did it by uniting a group of people. And this is what the new German nation state is going to look like. Now, one of the things you're going to see worldwide, and I really wish I had made a slide about this in hindsight, so make sure you're listening carefully. Maybe you just need to take these notes right now without a slide, and I apologize for that. Anywhere there's an empire, you're going to see nationalists who want to break away from the empire. So, for example, Britain will conquer India in this unit. We haven't talked about that story yet. There will be Indian nationalists who want their freedom. In places like Indonesia, where the Dutch still have an empire, there's definitely going to be Indonesian nationalists who want to be free and create a nation state. Any time there's a group of people in this unit being ruled by someone who does not look like them, talk like them, act like them, you are going to see nationalist movements. Yes, the idea starts in Europe. By the end of this period, it's going to spread to the Americas. It's going to spread to Africa. It's going to spread all throughout Asia. And all of these ideas are only going to accentuate themselves in the next time period. So anyway, that's nationalism. And we won't talk about nationalism again till after Christmas. But when we talk about it, nationalism is one of the most important driving forces for everything that's happened in the 20th century, many times for bad. Because some of the great nationalist leaders of the 20th century, Hitler, Stalin, Wilhelm III, Mao Zedong, are also the great butchers of the 20th century. That is an unfortunate story for a much later day. Everyone, hope you enjoyed it. Stay on. I'll give you guys your work. Have a awesome day.